The fluorescent lights of the Vermont Herald newsroom buzzed overhead as Marcus Chen stared at the manila folder his editor had just dropped on his desk. Outside, the October wind rattled the old windows of the downtown Burlington building, carrying with it the first hints of another brutal New England winter. "Marcus, I need you to dig into this St. Benedict story," said Janet Morrison, the paper's veteran editor, her voice carrying that familiar tone that meant she expected results. "We've got 3 separate tips this week about missing kids at that fancy boarding school down in Middlebury." Marcus opened the folder, revealing photocopied newspaper clippings dating back 15 years. Headlines jumped out at him. "Student missing from elite Vermont school. Search continues for St. Benedict student. Another disappearance rocks prestigious academy." Jesus, Janet, how many kids are we talking about here? That's what I want you to find out. Official count from the state is isolated incidents, but our sources are telling a different story. Janet pulled up a chair, her weathered face serious. "Look, St. Benedict's has been untouchable for decades. Old money, political connections, alumni who run half the state. But if even a fraction of what we're hearing is true..." Marcus flipped through the clippings, noting the pattern. Most disappearances occurred during fall and winter months. Students simply vanished. Sometimes their belongings remained in dorm rooms, sometimes not. Local police investigations seemed to fizzle out quickly, usually with statements about troubled teens and voluntary departures. What kind of sources are we talking about? Former staff, a couple of parents who've been trying to get answers. For years, there's this woman, Sarah Hendricks. Her daughter Emma disappeared from St. Benedict's in 2019. Straight, a student, happy kid, no history of running away. One day she's there, next day she's gone. School says she was depressed, probably. Ran off to find herself in California or something. Marcus made a note, and Mrs. Hendricks doesn't buy it? Not for a second. She's been fighting the school and police ever since, demanding proper investigations. She's the one who started counting, says she's documented 198 cases over 15 years. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. 198? That's not possible. Someone would have noticed. The FBI, state police, somebody. That's what makes this story so important, Marcus. If it's true, how did it stay hidden? And if it's not true, why are people so desperate to make us believe it is? Marcus closed the folder, already feeling the familiar tingle of a big story. "What's my timeline?" "Take whatever you need, but I want regular updates." "And Marcus?" Janet stood, smoothing down her cardigan. "Be careful. St. Benedict's has lawyers that cost more per hour than most people make in a month. We need this bulletproof." After Janet left, Marcus sat alone with the folder, studying a photograph of Emma Hendricks. 16 years old, blonde hair, bright smile. She looked like any teenager, maybe a little more polished than most, given St. Benedict's $60,000 annual tuition. But her eyes held something Marcus recognized from years of covering tragedy: intelligence and curiosity. That suggested she wouldn't just disappear without a trace. He picked up his phone and dialed the number Janet had provided. "Mrs. Hendricks? This is Marcus Chun from the Vermont Herald. I understand you've been trying to get answers about your daughter Emma's disappearance. I'd like to help tell that story." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Marcus wondered if the call had dropped. Then he heard a sharp intake of breath. "You're the first reporter who's called me back in 2 years, Sarah Hendricks said, her voice raw with exhaustion. "Can you meet me tonight? I have things to show you. Things that will make you understand why they don't want this story told." Marcus grabbed his notebook and pen. "Where do you want to meet?" "There's a diner in Middlebury called Rosie's, 7 o'clock. "And Mr. Chun?" "Don't tell anyone you're meeting me. In this town, walls have ears, and some of those ears belong to people who've spent a lot of money to keep certain secrets buried." As Marcus hung up, he looked out the window toward the distant mountains where St. Benedict's Academy sat like a fortress among the Vermont hills. Something told him that once he drove down there tonight, his life would never be quite the same. The fluorescent light above his desk flickered, casting momentary shadows across Emma Hendrick's photograph, making her smile seem to waver between hope and warning. Rosie's Diner occupied a corner lot in downtown Middlebury, its neon sign casting pink and blue light across the wet pavement. Marcus arrived at 6:45 p.m., wanting to scope out the location before Sarah Hendricks showed up. The place was nearly empty, just a couple of college students from Middlebury College hunched over coffee and textbooks, and an elderly man reading a newspaper at the counter. Sarah Hendricks walked through the door at exactly 7 o'clock. Marcus recognized her immediately from the photos he'd found online during his afternoon research. Medium height, brown hair streaked with premature gray, wearing a dark coat that had seen better days. But it was her eyes that struck him most. They held the particular combination of determination and desperation he'd seen in too many parents who'd lost children. "Mr. Chun?" She approached his booth cautiously, clutching a worn leather satchel against her chest. "Please call me Marcus. Thank you for meeting me." Sarah slid into the opposite seat, declining his offer of coffee. "I need to know something first. Are you here because you want to write a real story? Or are you here because your editor thinks this will make good copy?" The directness of her question caught Marcus off guard. "Mrs. Hendricks, Sarah, I've been a journalist for 12 years. I've covered everything from city council meetings to mass shootings. I don't waste my time or anyone else's on stories I don't believe matter." She studied his face for a long moment, then seemed to reach some internal decision. "Emma was my only child. Her father died when she was 8, heart attack at 39. I worked 2 jobs to send her to St. Benedict's because she was brilliant. And I thought she deserved better than the public schools around here." Sarah opened her satchel and pulled out a thick folder. "This is everything I've collected over the past 4 years. Police reports, school correspondence, newspaper clippings, and my own investigation notes." Marcus opened the folder carefully. The first document was Emma's missing person report, filed with the Vermont State Police on November 15, 2019. As he read, Sarah continued talking. "Emma called me on Thursday, November 14th, around 8 p.m. Normal conversation. Complained about her chemistry teacher, excited about the upcoming Thanksgiving break. She was supposed to come home that Friday for the long weekend. But she never showed up. The school called me Friday evening, said Emma hadn't been in classes that day. When I got there Saturday morning, her roommate said Emma's bed hadn't been slept in Friday night, but all her belongings were still there. Clothes, laptop, even her purse with cash and credit cards." Marcus flipped through police interview transcripts. "What did the school administration tell you?" Sarah's laugh held no humor. "Dr. Vincent Blackwood, he's the headmaster. He was very sympathetic, very concerned. Said Emma had seemed troubled lately, that she'd been meeting with the school counselor about family issues and adjustment problems. Was any of that true?" "Marcus, Emma called me every other day. We talked about everything. If she was having problems, I would have known. But when I asked to see the counselor's notes, suddenly they were confidential. Patient privacy, they said." Marcus found a photocopy of a letter from the school's legal department. "They wouldn't release any records? Not without a court order. Which my lawyer said we'd never get without evidence of wrongdoing. Perfect catch-22. Sarah pulled out a hand-drawn map. "This is the school layout. Emma's dorm was here, in Whitmore Hall. According to her roommate, Emma left their room around 10 p.m. Thursday night, said she was going to the library to finish a paper. Library security cameras conveniently malfunctioned that night. Only night in 6 months. According to the maintenance logs, I finally got through a FOIA request." Marcus studied the map, noting the location of various buildings. Tell me about the other disappearances. How did you start connecting them? Sarah's expression darkened. About 6 months after Emma vanished, I was going through online forums for missing children. I found a post from another mother, Patricia Wells. Her son David had disappeared from St. Benedict's in 2017. Then I found more parents scattered across New England, all with children who'd vanished from the same school. She pulled out a thick spreadsheet. I started making lists, cross-referencing dates, circumstances. The pattern became clear. Every year, between October and February, students would disappear. Not all at once. That would be too obvious. One here, one there. Usually kids who were scholarship students or didn't have powerful families. Marcus ran his finger down the list. Names, dates, brief descriptions. The scope was staggering. How is this possible? How does one school lose this many students without triggering federal investigations? Because officially, they didn't lose them. According to St. Benedict's records, these kids all withdrew, or transferred, or were expelled for disciplinary reasons. The families were told their children ran away, had breakdowns, were on drugs. The school had explanations for everything. But you don't believe the explanations. Marcus, look at this list. Honor roll students, kids from stable families, students who were happy and engaged. Does it make sense that all of them would just vanish? Marcus was beginning to see the scope of what Sarah was suggesting. You think someone at the school was involved. I think someone at the school was responsible. Sarah leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. And I think they had help covering it up. Look at the investigating officers. Same 3 names appear on dozens of these cases. Look at the journalists who were supposed to cover these stories. Assignments got reassigned, stories got killed. This isn't just institutional negligence, Marcus. This is organized conspiracy. Outside, the October wind howled through the trees lining the street. Marcus closed the folder, his mind reeling. If even half of what Sarah was suggesting was true, this wasn't just a story. It was one of the largest criminal conspiracies in Vermont history. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Do you think Emma is still alive? Tears filled her eyes for the first time that evening. I don't know. But I know she didn't run away, and I know St. Benedict's is lying about what happened to her. Whether she's alive or dead, she deserves justice. They all do. Marcus nodded, already planning his next moves. I'm going to need copies of everything you have. And Sarah, you were right to be paranoid about people listening. From now on, we communicate through secure channels only. As they prepared to leave, Sarah grabbed his arm. Be careful, Marcus. You're not the first reporter to look into this. The last one who got close. Well, let's just say his editor suddenly decided the story wasn't worth pursuing. 3 days later, Marcus sat in his rented Honda Civic at the edge of St. Benedict's Academy's campus, studying the imposing Gothic Revival buildings through binoculars. The school occupied nearly 500 acres of pristine Vermont countryside. Its red brick buildings and manicured grounds projecting an image of tradition and academic excellence that had attracted New England's elite for over a century. His press credentials had gotten him a scheduled interview with Headmaster Dr. Vincent Blackwood for 2 p.m., but Marcus had arrived early to get a feel for the campus. Students moved between buildings in small groups, their conversations and laughter carrying across the quad despite the crisp November air. Mr. Chun? A young woman approached his car, her St. Benedict's blazer and confident demeanor marking her as a student. I'm Jessica Thornton, Sr., Class President. Dr. Blackwood asked me to escort you to his office. Marcus locked his car and followed Jessica through the main gates. Up close, the school was even more impressive and intimidating. Carved stone crests adorned building entrances, and bronze plaques celebrated generations of distinguished alumni. Senators, judges, Fortune 500 CEOs. Beautiful campus, Marcus said, hoping to get Jessica talking. It's been my home for 4 years, she replied. But something in her tone suggested that home might not be entirely comfortable. Dr. Blackwood said you're writing about the school's history? Marcus had deliberately been vague about his story's focus. Among other things, I understand St. Benedict's has quite a reputation for academic excellence. Jessica nodded, but her smile seemed forced. We definitely push ourselves hard here. Sometimes maybe too hard. They passed Whitmore Hall, Emma Hendricks' former dormitory. Marcus made a mental note of the building's layout, the nearby parking areas, potential exit routes. As they walked, he noticed something odd. Security cameras seemed to be everywhere. But many appeared to be old models, and several had obvious blind spots. Here we are, Jessica said, leading him into the administration building. Dr. Blackwood's office is on the 3rd floor. The elevator ride was silent, but Marcus caught Jessica glancing at him nervously. As the doors opened, she spoke quietly. Mr. Chen, if you're really writing about the school's history, you might want to talk to some of the older staff. They remember things differently than the official version. Before Marcus could respond, Jessica had stepped out and was walking quickly down the hall. Dr. Blackwood will see you now, she called over her shoulder. Dr. Vincent Blackwood's office was a monument to academic achievement and old money influence. Floor-to-ceiling bookcases lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes and framed photographs of Blackwood with various political figures. The man himself was in his early 60s, silver-haired and imposing, wearing a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. Mr. Chen, welcome to St. Benedict's, Blackwood said, rising from behind an antique mahogany desk. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced. I understand you're interested in our school's storied history. Thank you for making time, Dr. Blackwood. I'm particularly interested in the school's approach to student welfare and safety. Something flickered in Blackwood's eyes so briefly that Marcus almost missed it. Well, student safety is certainly our highest priority. We've been educating New England's finest young minds for over a century without any significant incidents. Marcus pulled out his notebook. I've been researching some reports of students who've left the school under unusual circumstances. Could you tell me about your policies regarding student departures? I'm not sure what you mean by unusual circumstances, Blackwood said, his tone remaining pleasant but becoming more measured. Students leave boarding schools for many reasons: family relocations, academic transfers, personal issues. We handle each case with appropriate confidentiality and care. What about Emma Hendricks? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Blackwood was silent for several seconds, his fingers drumming against his desk. I'm afraid I can't discuss specific students, Mr. Chen. Privacy laws, you understand. Her mother has given me permission to ask about Emma's case. She disappeared from campus in November 2019. Her belongings were left behind, and she's never been found. Emma Hendricks was a troubled young woman dealing with significant personal issues following her father's death, Blackwood said, his voice becoming colder. Despite our best efforts to provide counseling and support, she made the unfortunate decision to leave campus without permission. We immediately contacted authorities and her family. Mrs. Hendricks says Emma was happy and well-adjusted. She doesn't believe Emma would have run away. Blackwood stood, signaling the interview was over. Mr. Chun, I think there may be some confusion about why you're here. If you're writing a legitimate piece about St. Benedict's academic programs or history, I'm happy to provide information. If you're here to chase conspiracy theories or sensationalist stories, then I'm afraid we have nothing further to discuss. Marcus remained seated, consulting his notebook. Dr. Blackwood, I've documented 198 students who've disappeared from St. Benedict's over the past 15 years. Are you saying all of them simply decided to leave? For the first time, Blackwood's composure cracked. His face flushed and his hands clenched into fists. That's an outrageous accusation with no basis in fact. I think this interview is over. Could I speak with some of your faculty members? Perhaps someone who's been here long enough to remember. The earlier cases? You need to leave, now. Blackwood pressed a button on his phone. Security to my office, please. Marcus stood slowly, tucking his notebook away. Dr. Blackwood, I'm going to keep investigating this story. If you'd like to provide your perspective, I'm happy to listen. But the story is going to be written either way. 2 uniformed security guards appeared in the doorway. Blackwood nodded toward Marcus. Please escort Mr. Chun off campus immediately. He's no longer welcome here. As the guards flanked him, Marcus pulled out a business card and placed it on Blackwood's desk. In case you change your mind. The walk back to his car was tense but uneventful. As they reached the parking lot, one of the guards, an older man with kind eyes, spoke quietly. You might want to try talking to Helen Morrison. She worked in the kitchen here for 30 years before retiring last month. Lives on Elm Street. In town. Marcus nodded his thanks, noting the name. As he drove off campus, he caught sight of Dr. Blackwood watching from his office window, talking animatedly on his phone. That evening, Marcus sat in his hotel room reviewing his notes. Blackwood's reaction had been telling. Defensive, angry, almost panicked. The headmaster clearly knew more than he was saying, but proving it would require more than hostile interviews. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. If you want to know what really happens at St. Benedict's, meet me at the old cemetery on Route 7 at midnight. Come alone. A friend. Marcus stared at the message, weighing his options. Every instinct told him it could be a trap, but it might also be his first real break in the case. He checked his watch, 10:30 p.m., time, to find out who else wanted to tell him the truth about St. Benedict's Academy. The Middlebury Cemetery on Route 7 was a sprawling collection of weathered headstones and ancient oak trees, dating back to the town's founding in 1761. Marcus arrived at 11:50 p.m., parking his car near the entrance and walking carefully among the graves by flashlight. The November wind cut through his jacket, carrying the scent of dead leaves and approaching winter. A figure emerged from behind a large granite monument, a woman in her 50s, wearing a heavy coat and knit cap. She moved with the careful steps of someone who'd spent decades on her feet. Mr. Chun? I'm Helen Morrison, the retired kitchen worker the security guard had mentioned. Marcus approached cautiously, keeping his hands visible. Thank you for reaching out, Mrs. Morrison. This is quite a dramatic meeting place. Helen's laugh was bitter. Dramatic, maybe, but private. And appropriate, considering how many of those kids ended up in places like this. She gestured for him to follow her deeper into the cemetery, to a section where newer graves were marked with simple stone markers. These are the paupers' graves, unclaimed bodies, homeless people, unidentified remains. The county buries them here when no one else will claim them. Marcus shone his flashlight over the markers, reading names and dates. Several were marked simply unknown male or unknown female, with dates spanning the past 15 years. Helen, what are you trying to tell me? I worked at St. Benedict's for 30 years. Mr. Chun. Started in the kitchen when I was 23, worked my way up to head cook. I saw everything that happened in that place. She pulled a thermos from her coat and poured herself coffee with shaking hands. I should have spoken up years ago, but I was scared. Still am, if I'm being honest. Scared of what? Scared of ending up like the others who tried to tell the truth. Helen pointed to one of the unmarked graves. Michael Torres found dead in his apartment 3 years ago. Supposed heart attack, but he was only 35 and healthy as a horse. He was a security guard at St. Benedict's. Started asking too many questions about the missing kids. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. You think he was murdered? I think people who threaten St. Benedict's reputation have a habit of dying unexpectedly. Helen sat on a stone bench, motioning for Marcus to join her. But I'm dying anyway. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed 6 months ago. Gives a person perspective on what's really important. Helen, tell me what you know about the missing students. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the unmarked graves. It started in 2008, maybe 2009. Dr. Blackwood had just become headmaster, replacing old Dr. Patterson who'd run the school for 40 years. Blackwood brought in new policies, new staff, new programs. What kind of programs? Special counseling sessions for troubled students, academic remediation that happened late at night, disciplinary procedures that were never put in official records. Helen's voice dropped to a whisper. And students who went to these special programs sometimes never came back to the dining hall. Marcus pulled out his notebook, but Helen grabbed his arm. No writing, not yet, just listen. He put the notebook away. I'm listening. The first one I remember was David Chun, no relation to you, I assume. Sweet kid, scholarship student from Boston. Got in trouble for having marijuana in his room. Not unusual for teenage boys, you understand. But instead of the normal suspension, he was sent to special counseling with Dr. Winters. Who's Dr. Winters? School psychologist. Been there since Blackwood arrived, but he's not like any psychologist I've ever met. Cold man, scary eyes. Students were terrified of him. Helen shuddered. David went to see Dr. Winters on a Tuesday. Never showed up for meals after that. Officially, he was expelled and sent home, but I never saw him leave campus. Did you ask about him? Course I did. I liked that boy. Made sure he got extra portions because he was too skinny. But when I asked the other staff, they just said he'd been dealt with and I should mind my own business. Marcus was beginning to understand the scope of what Helen was describing. How many students went to see Dr. Winters and never came back? Over the years? Dozens, maybe more. Always the same pattern, some minor infraction, or they'd ask too many questions about something, or they'd threaten to tell their parents about things they'd seen. Then off to Dr. Winters, and poof, gone. What kind of things were they threatening? To tell their parents? Helen stood and walked to another section of the cemetery, Marcus following. There are things that happen at that school, Mr. Chun. Things that would destroy St. Benedict's reputation if they ever came to light. The missing students weren't random. They were witnesses. Witnesses to what? Drug dealing, for one thing. Not student drug use. That's small potatoes. I'm talking about serious trafficking, using the school's connections and alumni network to move product through New England. Some of the faculty were involved, maybe some board members too. Marcus felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. And students who discovered this got sent to Dr. Winters, along with students who witnessed other things, financial irregularities, admissions fraud, inappropriate relationships between faculty and students. The school had zero tolerance for whistleblowers. They reached a section of the cemetery where fresh dirt marked recent burials. Helen pointed to one grave marked only with a number, 2019 to 47. That's where they buried the Jane Doe they found in the river last spring. Young woman, maybe 16 or 17. Body was too decomposed for visual identification, but the dental work suggested private health care, expensive orthodontics. Marcus stared at the grave. You think it might have been one of the missing students? I think a lot of those unclaimed bodies might be missing students. DNA testing is expensive, and if there's no family pushing for answers, double quotes, Helen shrugged sadly. Easy enough to bury the evidence. Helen, this is huge. If what you're saying is true, we're talking about serial murder, institutional corruption at the highest levels. Why haven't you gone to the FBI? Because I don't know who can be trusted. St. Benedict's alumni are everywhere. State government, federal agencies, judiciary. The school's board of trustees reads like a who's who of New England power brokers. Helen turned to face him directly. But you're a journalist. You can get this story out there, make it impossible to ignore. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. I'll need proof, Helen. Documentation, physical evidence, something more than testimony. I have some things, she said, pulling a small key from her pocket. Storage unit on Industrial Road. Unit 47. Everything I could save over the years. Staff memos, security footage I copied. Financial records I wasn't supposed to see. It's not everything, but it's a start. She pressed the key into his hand. But Marcus, you need to understand something. Once you start down this path, there's no going back. They've killed to protect their secrets before, and they won't hesitate to do it again. As if summoned by her words, the sound of car engines echoed from the cemetery entrance. Helen's face went pale. They followed one of us. We need to go. Now. Marcus grabbed her arm, helping her move quickly between the headstones toward the back of the cemetery. Behind them, he could see flashlight beams beginning to sweep the grounds. There's a gate at the back fence, Helen whispered. Leads to the woods behind the high school. Can you make it? Marcus nodded, supporting Helen as they hurried through the darkness. Whatever was in that storage unit had better be worth risking. Their lives for, because he had the feeling their conversation tonight had just painted targets on both their backs. As they reached the fence, Helen grabbed his jacket. Emma Hendricks, she said urgently. I remember her. Sweet girl, reminded me of my own granddaughter. She came to the kitchen crying one night, said she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to see. I told her to keep quiet, try to transfer schools. What had she seen? Dr. Winters and two men loading something heavy into a van behind the medical building. Something wrapped in plastic sheeting. Helen's eyes filled with tears. She disappeared 3 days later. The flashlight beams were getting closer. Marcus helped Helen through a gap in the fence, then followed her into the dark woods beyond. Whatever secret St. Benedict's was hiding, Emma Hendricks had died for discovering them, and now Marcus was about to uncover the truth she'd been killed to conceal. Marcus spent the night in a different hotel, paying cash and using a fake name, his paranoia heightened by the previous evening's close call at the cemetery. Helen Morrison had insisted they split up after escaping through the woods, agreeing to meet the next morning at a truck stop outside town. At 8 a.m., Marcus found Helen sitting in a corner booth at the 24-hour diner attached to the truck stop, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd slept as little as he had. Any trouble last night? He asked, sliding into the opposite seat. 3 cars drove slowly past my house between midnight and dawn, Helen replied, stirring her coffee with shaking hands. Could be coincidence, but I've lived on Elm Street for 15 years and never seen that kind of traffic. Marcus had experienced similar surveillance, cars that seemed to follow him. Too many coincidental appearances of the same faces. Helen, before we go to that storage unit, I need to ask you something. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this? Once I have that evidence, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. Helen's laugh was hollow. Mr. Chun, I've got maybe 6 months to live, and I've spent 30 years watching children disappear while doing nothing to stop it. My conscience won't survive another day of silence, even if my body might. 30 minutes later, they stood before Storage Unit 47 at U-Store on Industrial Road. The facility was mostly empty on a Tuesday morning, which Helen had insisted was important. Fewer witnesses, less chance of being observed. The storage unit contained 4 bankers' boxes, 2 filing cabinets, and a small safe. Helen opened the safe first, revealing several computer hard drives and a stack of DVDs labeled with dates going back to 2010. Security footage, she explained. I had a friend in the IT department who made copies before the official files were accidentally corrupted. Most of it's just routine campus activity. but some shows things that were never supposed to be recorded. Marcus examined one of the DVDs, labeled November 2019, Medical Building. Emma Hendricks' disappearance date. What am I going to see on these? Things that will make you understand why so many people have died to keep this quiet. Helen opened the first banker's box, revealing hundreds of documents. Financial records showing payments to offshore accounts. Staff memos about special disposal procedures. Communications between Dr. Blackwood and people who definitely aren't educators. Marcus photographed several documents with his phone, noting names, dates, and amounts. One memo from Dr. Blackwood to someone identified only as the client discussed processing delays and increased caution following recent complications. Helen, who is the client? I was never able to figure that out completely, but the payments always came through a shell company called Northwind Consulting. Millions of dollars over the years, supposedly for educational consulting services. Helen pulled out a thick folder. But consulting services don't require body disposal protocols. The folder contained copies of purchase orders for industrial cleaning supplies, body bags, and chemical lime, materials typically used for biological cleanup and decomposition acceleration. All orders were processed through the school's maintenance department but charged to a special account labeled Facility Remediation. My God, Marcus whispered, photographing the documents. They were running some kind of human trafficking operation through the school. That was my conclusion too. Take kids who wouldn't be missed. Scholarship students, kids from broken families, troubled teens whose parents were already expecting problems. Process them through Dr. Winter's counseling program. Then deliver them to clients who paid premium prices for young, educated victims. Marcus felt sick. And the ones who wouldn't cooperate or tried to escape. Helen pointed to the purchase orders for lime and body bags, disposed of as medical waste or buried in unmarked graves. The school has its own crematorium, supposedly, for biological research specimens. Very convenient for destroying evidence. Marcus loaded one of the DVDs into a portable player Helen had brought. The footage was grainy black and white, but clear enough to show two men in maintenance uniforms, wheeling a large laundry cart from the medical building to a van at 2:30 a.m. on November 15, 2019. That's 12 hours after Emma's last phone call to her mother, Marcus noted. Watch the next part, Helen said grimly. The footage continued, showing Dr. Winters emerging from the medical building, speaking briefly with the maintenance workers, then handing one of them an envelope. As the van drove away, Winters walked directly toward the camera, his face clearly visible in the infrared lighting. He knew the camera was there, Marcus realized. This footage was supposed to be deleted. Lucky for us, my IT friend had already made copies by the time the deletion order came through. Helen ejected the DVD and handed Marcus the entire collection. There are 14 more like this, showing similar activities over the past decade. Marcus spent another hour reviewing documents and footage, building a picture of systematic murder and human trafficking that had operated under the cover of Vermont's most prestigious boarding school. The scope was staggering, not just individual crimes, but an entire network involving school officials, local law enforcement, and unnamed clients paying millions for access to vulnerable teenagers. Helen, I need to ask you something difficult. Do you think any of the missing students might still be alive? Helen was quiet for several minutes, carefully repacking the boxes. The early ones, maybe, before they perfected their system. But in recent years, she shook her head. The purchase orders for disposal materials matched too closely with the disappearance dates. I think they realized live victims were too risky, too much chance of escape or rescue. Marcus felt anger building in his chest, professional detachment, giving way to raw fury at the systematic murder of children. We need to get this to the FBI, to federal prosecutors who aren't connected to St. Benedict's alumni network. I've already contacted someone, Helen said. Agent Sarah Kim with the FBI's Crimes Against Children unit in Boston. She specializes in trafficking cases and has no Vermont connections that I could find. I told her a journalist would be contacting her with evidence of a major case. As they prepared to leave the storage unit, Helen grabbed Marcus's arm one final time. "Mr. Chun, promise me something. Don't let them spin this as the actions of a few rogue individuals. This was institutional, systematic, protected by people at the highest levels. The whole system is corrupt." Marcus nodded, already mentally composing the story that would expose not just the crimes at St. Benedict's, but the network of wealth and power that had enabled them for 15 years. As they drove away from the storage unit, Marcus noticed a black SUV that seemed to be following them. Helen saw it too, her face going pale. "They know," she whispered. "God help us, they know." Marcus pressed harder on the accelerator, his phone already dialing Agent Kim's number. Time was running out, and the people responsible for 198 missing children were about to discover that their secrets were no longer safe. Behind them, the black SUV maintained its distance, but Marcus could see more vehicles joining the pursuit. The final confrontation was coming, and he wasn't sure any of them would survive it. Agent Sarah Kim arrived at the Vermont State Police Barracks in Williston at 3 p.m., accompanied by a team of federal agents and forensic specialists. Marcus had spent the morning in protective custody, reviewing evidence with FBI investigators, while Helen Morrison remained under guard at a secure medical facility. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showing $12 million in payments from Northwind Consulting to St. Benedict's Academy over 5 years. Security footage documenting the disposal of bodies. Purchase orders for equipment used in human trafficking and murder. Communications between Dr. Blackwood and unknown clients discussing product specifications and delivery schedules. Mr. Chun, we've executed search warrants for St. Benedict's Academy, Dr. Blackwood's residence, and the medical facility on campus. Agent Kim explained as they sat in a conference room lined with evidence boxes. What we've found corroborates everything in Mrs. Morrison's documentation. Marcus looked up from the photographs spread across the table, images of underground rooms beneath the medical building, equipped with restraints, medical equipment, and what appeared to be surgical facilities. Have you found any survivors? 3 students who were reported as transferred to other schools are actually being held in a facility in New Hampshire. They're alive, but they'll need extensive medical and psychological treatment. Agent Kim's expression was grim. We also discovered the remains of at least 12 individuals buried on school property. The scope of the conspiracy was becoming clear. Dr. Vincent Blackwood had transformed St. Benedict's Academy into a front for human trafficking, targeting vulnerable students and selling them to wealthy clients who paid premium prices for young, educated victims. Students who resisted or threatened to expose the operation were murdered and disposed of through the school's medical facilities. What about the local authorities? How did this stay hidden for so long? 3 members of the Vermont State Police were receiving regular payments from Northwind Consulting, Agent Kim said. The county prosecutor's office has also been compromised. We're looking at a corruption network that extends well beyond the school itself. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Hendricks. Saw the news. Is Emma really gone? The hardest part of the investigation had been confirming the fates of specific victims. Emma Hendricks' remains had been identified. Through dental records, she'd been murdered within hours of discovering Dr. Winters and his associates disposing of another student's body. Marcus looked at Agent Kim. When can I publish the story? We've arrested 17 individuals so far, including Dr. Blackwood, Dr. Winters, and the Northwind Consulting principals. The immediate threat to witnesses has been neutralized. Agent Kim paused. But Mr. Chun, you should know that this case is far from over. The client list we recovered includes some very prominent names, politicians, business leaders, people with resources to continue fighting this investigation. Are you saying they might try to cover this up even now? I'm saying powerful people are going to prison, and they'll use every resource at their disposal to minimize their exposure. Your story might be the only thing that prevents this from being quietly buried in plea bargains and sealed court records. That evening, Marcus sat in his hotel room, writing the most important story of his career. The article would run simultaneously in the Vermont Herald and be picked up by major national outlets through wire services. But beyond the journalistic achievement, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility to 198 victims whose stories deserve to be told. His phone rang. Janet Morrison from the Herald. Marcus, I've been getting calls all day from lawyers representing various St. Benedict's alumni. They're threatening lawsuits, claiming you're publishing unsubstantiated allegations. Janet, I have FBI confirmation of 17 arrests, physical evidence of murder and trafficking, and testimony from survivors. This isn't allegations, it's documented fact. I know that, and you know that. But these people have resources and connections we can't match. Are you prepared for the fight that's coming? Marcus looked at the photograph of Emma Hendricks taped to his laptop. The same image Sarah had shown him that first night at Rosie's Diner, a 16-year-old girl whose only crime had been curiosity about suspicious activity at her school. Janet, they killed children. They've been killing children for 15 years while hiding behind reputation and money. If we don't tell this story, who will? Then we tell it. Front page, above the fold, every detail we can legally print. But, Marcus? Yeah? After this publishes, your life is never going to be the same. You're taking on some of the most powerful families in New England. Make sure you're ready for that. Marcus saved his document and began formatting it for publication. The headline read, 198 children vanished in 15 years. The horrors of St. Benedict's School no one dared reveal. As he worked, Marcus thought about Helen Morrison, fighting cancer while risking everything to expose the truth. About Sarah Hendricks, who'd spent 4 years demanding answers about her daughter's disappearance. About Emma and the 197 other victims whose lives had been stolen to protect the reputation of a prestigious boarding school. At midnight, Marcus hit send, transmitting the story to editors at newspapers across the country. Within hours, the systematic murder and trafficking operation at St. Benedict's Academy would be front-page news nationwide. But even as satisfaction filled him, Marcus knew this was only the beginning. The arrests were just the first phase. The real battle would come in courtrooms, where expensive lawyers would fight to minimize sentences and seal records, where powerful families would use every connection to distance themselves from the scandal. Outside his hotel window, Marcus could see the lights of St. Benedict's Academy in the distance. The Gothic buildings now surrounded by FBI evidence teams and crime scene tape. Tomorrow, those buildings would be empty. The school officially closed pending investigation. But somewhere in New England, wealthy clients who had paid millions for access to trafficked children were making phone calls, hiring lawyers, planning strategies to escape justice. The story was published. The truth was revealed. But the fight for justice had only just begun. 6 months after Marcus's story broke, the courtroom in Burlington Federal Courthouse was packed with victims' families, reporters, and curious observers watching the conclusion of one of New England's largest human trafficking prosecutions. Dr. Vincent Blackwood sat at the defendant's table, his expensive suit in silver, hair a stark contrast to the orange jumpsuit he'd soon be wearing. Marcus sat in the gallery next to Sarah Hendricks, who had become something of a reluctant spokesperson for the victims' families. Across the aisle, Helen Morrison occupied a wheelchair, her cancer treatments having taken a visible toll. But her eyes remained sharp and determined as she watched the proceedings. Judge Margaret Foster, a no-nonsense federal jurist with 30 years on the bench, read the verdicts in a clear, Steady voice. Vincent Blackwood, on the charge of conspiracy to commit human trafficking, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. On the charge of racketeering, guilty. The pattern continued for 17 defendants total, including Dr. Winters, 3 Vermont State Police officers, and the principals of Northwind Consulting. The evidence had been overwhelming: financial records, video footage, testimony from survivors, and physical evidence from the crime scenes. Mr. Blackwood, Judge Foster continued, you have been convicted of orchestrating a criminal enterprise that resulted in the deaths of 198 young people over 15 years. The court sentences you to life in prison without possibility of parole. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Sarah Hendricks squeezed Marcus's hand, tears streaming down her face. Behind them, other families embraced, finally seeing justice for their lost children, but the victory was bittersweet. During the investigation, FBI agents had uncovered a client list containing over 400 names: politicians, business leaders, entertainment figures, and other wealthy individuals who had paid for access to trafficked students. Most would never face prosecution due to lack of direct evidence, and many had used their influence to avoid being publicly named. After the sentencing, Marcus found himself on the courthouse steps with Sarah and Helen, facing a crowd of reporters, asking about his next investigative projects. Mr. Chun, one reporter called out, rumor is you're writing a book about the St. Benedict's case. Any truth to that? Marcus nodded. The full story is too complex for newspaper articles. There are aspects of this case: the extent of the corruption, the network of complicit officials, the systematic cover-up, that deserve more detailed examination. What's your message to other journalists investigating similar cases? Marcus considered the question carefully. Power protects itself. Wealth buys silence. But the truth has a way of surfacing if you're persistent enough and brave enough to keep digging. Helen Norrison risked her life to expose these crimes. Sarah Hendricks never stopped fighting for answers about her daughter. Without people like them, Dr. Blackwood would still be running St. Benedict's Academy, and more children would be dying. Later that evening, Marcus, Sarah, and Helen gathered at a small memorial service in Middlebury Cemetery. A local stone carver had donated a large granite monument inscribed with the names of all 198 confirmed victims, including those whose remains were never recovered. Emma would have been 21 next month, Sarah said, placing flowers at the base of the memorial. She wanted to be a lawyer, said she was going to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Helen, despite her frail condition, had insisted on attending. All those children had dreams, plans, futures that were stolen from them. This memorial ensures they won't be forgotten. Marcus read some of the names carved into the stone: Emma Hendricks, David Chun, Patricia Wells, Thomas Morrison. Students from wealthy families and scholarship recipients, honor roll achievers and struggling learners, united in death by their vulnerability to predators who saw them as commodities rather than human beings. The hardest part, Marcus reflected, is knowing how many people turned a blind eye. Faculty members who noticed students disappearing but didn't ask questions. Alumni who heard rumors but chose not to investigate. Parents who accepted explanations that didn't make sense because it was easier than demanding the truth. 6 months later, Marcus's book The Benedict Papers, Inside America's Most Elite Child Trafficking Ring, was published to critical acclaim and commercial success. The book provided detailed documentation of the conspiracy, named previously unreported conspirators, and examined the systemic failures that allowed the crimes to continue for 15 years. But more importantly, it served as a memorial to the victims and a call to action for parents, educators, and law enforcement officials to remain vigilant against institutions that prioritize reputation over child safety. Benedict's Academy remained permanently closed, its buildings converted into a center for missing children advocacy and forensic training. The endowment, worth over $200 million, was distributed to victim compensation funds and organizations working to prevent human trafficking. Helen Morrison died peacefully in her sleep 8 months after the trial, having lived long enough to see justice served. Sarah Hendricks established the Emma Hendricks Foundation, which provides resources for families of missing children and advocates for stronger oversight of boarding schools and youth programs. Marcus continued his investigative journalism career, but the St. Benedict's case had changed him fundamentally. He now specialized in stories involving crimes against children, using the recognition from his book to gain access to cases that might otherwise remain buried. 3 years after the story broke, Marcus returned to Middlebury Cemetery on the anniversary of Emma Hendricks' disappearance. The memorial had become a pilgrimage site for families of missing children, adorned with flowers, photographs, and personal mementos from visitors around the country. As he stood before the granite monument reading the names of 198 victims, Marcus reflected on the cost of uncovering the truth. Helen Morrison had sacrificed her final months of life to expose the conspiracy. Sarah Hendricks had endured years of official indifference and intimidation to keep her daughter's case alive. Dozens of other families had fought similar battles against powerful institutions determined to protect their reputations, but their courage had prevented other children from suffering the same fate. The St. Benedict's investigation had led to enhanced oversight of boarding schools nationwide, stricter background check requirements for educational staff, and federal legislation strengthening penalties for institutional child trafficking. The truth had been costly to uncover, but the cost of silence would have been immeasurably higher. As Marcus prepared to leave the cemetery, a young woman approached the memorial carrying a small bouquet of white roses. She appeared to be in her early 20s with blonde hair and familiar blue eyes. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Are you Marcus Chun, the journalist who wrote about St. Benedict's?" Marcus nodded. "Yes. Did you lose someone there?" "My sister," she replied, placing the roses beneath Emma Hendricks' name on the memorial. "Emma was my older sister. I'm Katie Hendricks." Marcus felt a chill of recognition. Sarah had mentioned Emma's younger sister, but said she rarely spoke about the case, preferring to grieve privately. "Katie, I'm so sorry for your loss. Your sister was incredibly brave. Her curiosity about what she'd witnessed helped expose the entire conspiracy." Katie nodded, tears in her eyes. "Mom told me Emma saw them loading something into a van behind the medical building. If she'd just stayed quiet." Katie, Emma's courage saved other children's lives. The evidence she tried to uncover became crucial to the FBI investigation. Her death wasn't meaningless. It was the catalyst that brought justice for all 198 victims. As the sun set over the Vermont hills, Marcus and Katie stood together at the memorial, remembering not just the victims but the price of truth in a world where power and money too often triumph over justice. The St. Benedict's case was closed, but its lessons would endure. That evil flourishes when good people choose silence. That institutional prestige cannot justify individual tragedy. And that sometimes the most important stories are the ones that people with power desperately want to keep hidden. Emma Hendricks and 197 other children had paid the ultimate price for adults' greed and society's willingness to look the other way. But their memory would serve as a permanent reminder that some truths are too important to remain buried, no matter how much it costs to dig them up.